it's actually okay to be wrong. Perfectly okay to be wrong. People are wrong all the time. If you think that you can only be right or you have failed, that is absolutely not the case. The journey is the fun part, and you're going to be wrong sometimes. I prefer to be wrong 20% of the time or less, but I'm comfortable. If I'm wrong 20% of the time, no problem. I'm making high quality decisions at scale. And so 80% right decisions, that's a really good batting average. If you put that in baseball, I would be the best hitter of all time.
Welcome to the Path to Passive podcast, where we talk about building wealth and empowering lifestyle through commercial real estate investing for tech professionals. I always wish that other tech professionals reaching financial freedom had documented their journey along the way, so I'm doing it for the rest of us. Join us as we explore stories, many failures, and lessons learned along the way. I hope you enjoy and subscribe. Well, Charles, thank you so much for your time here. I appreciate you spending time with us. We have a lot to cover today, and I'm certainly interested in learning about the asset class that you cover. I'm certainly interested in learning about your background. I had the pleasure of diving into the different episodes you've had. You've already covered on other podcasts as well, just learning about you from reading, etc. So for those of you that don't, or for those that don't already know you, just briefly talk about who you are just on the background, and we can dive into some questions.
Yeah, for sure. A big part of my brand and what makes me who I am is my construction and development experience, because that's really been my entire career. So I started at 16 framing houses, swinging a hammer, and it's hot in Texas in the summer, and we were on those roofs. We were sweating our butts off, and there was hard lessons. I shot myself in the nail gun in the foot with a nail gun at one point. That was a really tough lesson to learn. And I learned a lot of great lessons in the construction trades as I learned how to build houses with my hands, and then got into commercial construction, managed projects all over Texas for large builders, and started a construction company on my own, built large teams, built hundreds and hundreds of projects across the state. We're 5 billion in my experience portfolio. So got to learn a lot of things, many things the hard way. And there was a lot of relationships and a lot of fun and a lot of trips and a lot of food and a lot of great things, life experiences that construction allowed me to have. So very grateful for that experience, and that got us to the place where we are now as developers. And that was the culmination of all of these years of learning lots of different things, and now it plays very well into the development projects that we do. So it's a great spot in life for me. I'm very happy and happy to be doing what I'm doing. It doesn't feel like I'm working. It feels like I get to play every day and do stuff that's fun. So I'm jazzed to wake up every day and get to go do life again. So I'm in a really great spot and would love to tackle some hard questions and share with your listeners.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, the last thing you touched on is something I definitely want to come back to about the mixture of work and life. I
Mhm.
have a quote I'd love your comment on in that particular area. But one of the
Yeah.
things that really stood out to me that you were talking about on a different interview, you were sharing your experience about what was really different was going to swinging hammers, right, in the Texas heat, and being used to being someone that was a contributor, right? Thinking about what did I deliver today, and how you went from that sort of owner operator to the different companies you have today, the holding company, all the things you'll talk about as
Mhm.
the story unravels. But how was that process going from individual contributor, really, right? Being someone to deliver a thing to becoming that ownership mindset? What were some of the challenges that you had, and what did you do to overcome those? And I'm
Mhm.
teeing this up for a specific reason, but I would like to know what challenges you faced and how did you go through that progression?
Yeah, the mindset for me, it took a little while to get to that point of kind of reframing the way I thought about life. And I'm fortunate to be in networks of people who have figured this out at a younger age, and they've had different kinds of lifestyles or different successes or different careers because they were
Hmm.
able to kind of understand this mindset sooner. I had to learn it my own way, and I come from pretty humble beginnings. My dad's a firefighter, my mom's a nurse. Like, it wasn't like we were wealthy. I didn't have anybody that had a lot of experience in real estate or that had a big investment portfolio. We just all worked. We were just working people. And I
Hmm.
knew from a young age that I liked to work and I liked to be productive. And I was always trying to be really good at what I was doing and just deliver a lot of value for the time that I was being paid for. And it, even as a construction business owner, many years later, it was still about, hey, am I providing value with this hour that I'm spending? And I wasn't thinking, hey, am I scaling myself 1,000x? And
Hmm.
when you're trying to build wealth and you're essentially trading time for money, it's very challenging to build wealth that way. In fact, I would say that it's impossible to build lasting wealth that way. So it was a mindset for me. A big part of that was there was some linear trends like across the years, like just stepping. Like okay, you start at the bottom, framing houses. Now you are managing some stuff. Now you're managing bigger stuff. Now you're managing even more bigger stuff. Now you own a company that builds stuff. Now you build more stuff. Now
Mhm.
you are looking at the development role. Okay, now you develop stuff, and then the next iteration, really the only other spot there is that you develop and own stuff. So really, the
Mhm.
owning of stuff is what you want. So you don't have to go build new stuff all the time as a developer. The next role is to then own it. So we're in that phase now of transitioning from developing to then just owning, and the owning is where the real wealth is built, I think.
Okay,
So for
so
me, it was always about stepping. What's the next iteration for me? What's self improvement is everything that I live for, and that's in business and in personal and my fitness and my nutrition. And so it's just natural for me to want to find what is the next step.
absolutely. So it was really about, like you're saying, getting the most out of the hour that you had, right? So how can you be the most productive? And I've heard you briefly mention that you said your father was a good example of really having great work ethic too, right? And is that
Mhm.
what, as you're talking about your family, taking that into the workplace, being a master at your craft? Um, did you learn to manage people along the way? Was it, being responsible for, say, construction crews and then just bigger scope and bigger scope and bigger scope?
Mhm. Yeah. So for me, I wasn't I wasn't a very good people person in the beginning. I had to learn this. Some people just naturally they just fall into this and just like, oh, they're so good with people and they like
Right.
building teams and they're amazing at it. And that wasn't my route. I had to make some mistakes and not be a very nice boss,
Mm,
and had to learn some lessons of, hey, you have to treat people a certain way, and they'll work really really hard for you. So I'm fortunate to be in a place now where relationships are super valuable to me, and I understand much better how to manage those. So yeah, the transition for me of going from just a productive human to now being in charge of a lot of productive humans. I was always wanting to extract all of this production from them,
right.
and in some cases, I would get the production, but I might step over what are the really important human elements that make us all connected as people, and I used to miss some of those, and now I take even more time, and with my staff, we call it a connection meeting that we have with our staff periodically, and some of them are small groups, some of them are bigger groups, but it's about
Mhm.
what's going on in your life. What did you do this weekend? Forget work's fine, work's going to be here, it's not going
Yeah,
anywhere, but let's talk about you. And those are elements that I've learned as time's gone on that are super critical to just fostering that personal relationship, and whether that's employees or friends or family or anybody.
awesome. Yeah, I heard you mention that too. It was that really interested in, getting the most output, but over time changing that, right, to like you're even talking about and reflecting on it again now, having that more the connection aspect and
Yeah.
really seeing that that's what's most important. So along that path, it sounded like you hit you know, ceiling to mastering the craft. How do you get to the next level? And the personal development really helped on that aspect. What do I have to change in me, or how do I conquer this next thing for not only myself but for the community? And of course, mission, which you've talked about, Landvest, we'll get into too. But how did the economics degree come in? Right, you bridged this from swinging hammers to getting to each of the different levels. Why did you choose the economics degree?
Okay. Yeah, it said issues communicating with servers. So gotta love technology, right? So
Yeah.
as you were saying, you were talking about kind of the next phases of your question after relationships.
Yeah. And so what I was asking is that along that path, going from swinging hammers and conquering the next level,
Mhm.
you have a, a degree that you went through college to get the economics degree. You have a couple other, interesting tidbits. I heard what you're doing in college, but just following the path along, why did you choose economics, and how has that helped along the way? Just a data point or two in your journey.
Yeah, economics is always fascinating to me because of the worldview of looking at things, and supply and demand kind of drives that, right? So our supply and demand curve, we lots of things on a graph and intersecting lines, and how to understand those equations. Now, as it turns out, you don't need to know the equations. We have computers for that. So, not sure why they spend all this time doing handwritten equations in college. It makes no sense to me. But the worldview of an economist has been very helpful to me because I can think more like the people that are actually making decisions. So when the Fed is analyzing, how we're looking at the money supply, that is all very, very practical and easy to understand because I spent years in college doing this. So that I'm really grateful for, and I think that worldview has helped me. There are not a lot of people in construction that have that mindset, and that was really critical in going from being a construction manager or a builder into a developer, and then into being an owner, because that economics mindset and all the finance that goes around that, it was really, really important to have that background to couple with my field experience in order to be able to do the underwriting and to do all the finance that's required to make some of these things go.
Yeah, that's why I was asking that specifically, because surely you've probably met people along the way who might have stayed in construction crews and are there for a long time, right? Who don't continue to master the area they're at to get to the next place. And having those numbers, running the numbers, having the ability to see longer time horizons, or even looking in the past to see those trends really makes the difference. And so what I want to do is pivot to the next thing I think is really important. As you know, this is real estate investing for tech professionals for this podcast.
Hmm.
And we live in data all the time, all of the different tools, problem solving, which I have questions for you on, and your values and sort of your thesis around that too.
Hmm.
But I think one of the important things is really understanding the problem and opportunity. And I know, at least looking at the, looking at the things around land vest, et cetera, you have a big mission around solving housing crisis. So I'd love for you to just speak on this, talk about what the housing crisis really is for those that sort of heard it, but don't really know what it is. And how do you know it's a problem? What are the things that you're looking at?
Yeah. Well, my logical economist brain, I don't go, I don't do very well. I don't process the whole hyperbole of the media saying, "Oh, we have a problem. It's a problem." That's just somebody talking. I want to see the data. What do the
Mhm.
numbers say? Is there really a problem, or are you just saying there's a problem?
Exactly.
And so I like to see the real numbers, and the numbers and I focus on primarily on Texas because that's the market that we build in. But if I remember the numbers correctly, it's around 675,000 affordable homes that we're short right now just in Texas. So you think, oh, well, 675,000, that might not be that big a number. That's 675,000 homes.
Yeah.
You think about that. That's an insane amount. That's an amount we can't catch up to if we started building like crazy right now. And that's frustrating and troubling because from 2021 and on to now, that number is starting to get bigger very quickly. It's growing rapidly, and that's a concern for me. And I feel like we have an ability to affect that at many thousands of units a year, and we intend to do so. But it is a number. Like the numbers are staggering. I just did a video. It'll be out on my Instagram soon. Just did some videos yesterday for that, just on that exact topic, because the numbers are absolutely shocking how short we are. And a big part of this, if I go too long on this topic, just
No, please
shut me
go.
down.
I think it's really important to give context around the problem. So,
Yeah,
make it known and whatever's in your head about this.
yeah. We have some reasons, and you go back to this metric of what should housing cost. Okay. And it should cost about 2.6 times your yearly income. That's about the number that economists say, hey, that's a comfortable amount. That's the percentage of your income that housing should be. Okay, so you multiply your income times 2.6. The problem is right now, for most people, they're buying a house that's 5.8 or 6 times their income.
Got it. Buying a house is that
Right.
2.6 number you're referring to, the
Yeah,
purchase price of the
you
home.
should be buying a house that's 2.6, and most people are buying one that's 5.5 or
Got it.
5.8 or 6 times. That's a problem. Now, why
Yes.
are they doing that? There's a couple of reasons. One, because we in our heads think we need more than we need. If you go back to a time, let's say the 1950s, 1960s, Americans were pretty dialed in as to what was the right amount of housing,
Mhm.
and it's not nearly as much as we're spending now. People were pretty happy. I talked to my grandparents. They were very happy at that time in their life. Their house wasn't big, and it wasn't a giant percentage of their income, and everybody seemed to be fine.
Right.
But since then, our houses have gotten bigger and fancier, and we think that that's a need, and that's not a need, that's a want.
Mhm.
And there's a big difference.
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
And so that is the biggest element, is the size of the home. So if you look at the graph, and again, I'm an economist, I like charts and graphs. If I
Go
could
for
do
it.
everything in charts and graphs, that would make me so freaking happy. Yeah, if they could just do the news and charts and graphs, I would love that shit. But they won't. So I have to
You're
go
speaking
find
to
them.
tech people here, Charles.
I got you. I got you. So on the charts and the graphs, we've got our average income is going here, and then our average home price is going here.
Sure.
Almost in line with the average home price is the average home size. So those are directly tied.
Got it.
So yes, construction's expensive, but the homes are too damn big.
Got it.
They just factors are. You don't need a 5,000 square foot house. If
No.
you have the money and you can afford it, good for you. But if you're barely getting by, you don't need that size house. You just don't.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're finding with our workforce housing, our affordable units, is that we've got to get a smaller form factor because now we can get affordability, and we can do a 3 bedroom, two bath a home that's very comfortable, very livable, nice, has all the accoutrements that you would want, and we can do that in 1,300 square feet. That's
Hmm.
an affordable thing that we can put on the marketplace. So it just takes some thinking about things a little bit differently. I like to use the data as the starting point, as opposed to just using a feeling. And I think in this case, some Americans are going to have to adjust to that. Hey, you may not need this giant house. You may
Right.
actually need a much smaller form factor to live in.
Yeah, certainly. There's things and questions to be asked that could be read in between the lines, and deeper page metrics, so to speak. To dive into those. Do you think? Mm, I had a question for this, but basically, people are buying bigger homes, quote unquote, more home, that 5.6 or greater number than the 2.6 baseline number,
Right.
and this is basically what's causing people to really affect their entire lifestyle because they're spending more on homes and not able to do other things in the quote unquote economy, so to speak, as well, right?
Right. Yeah. You couple that with vehicles are more expensive. All these other things have actually increased in cost at a greater percentage than income has grown. And the housing just is such a big chunk that it's a massive effect because it's such a big portion of someone's total expendable income.
This is a it's kind of a I don't really know what any type of answer would be on this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Um, if you have any data or just thoughts, maybe studies that come out, or around why you think the homes continue just to get bigger and bigger, is that just a matter of general types of human nature and greed and the quote unquote need aspect, or what are your thoughts around that to give any context and texture?
Well, we see it more in the United States than we see it in other countries. Okay,
Okay.
so I think there's a
Yeah.
there's a psychological element there. Um, I've talked to some people about this, and there's definitely an Americanized thing where we want bigger. You go to Paris, you go to London, they're not living on quite the same form factor. It happens a
Hmm.
little bit there for sure. Um, those are just different scenarios, and that those cultures tend to be structured a little bit differently, and getting bigger and bigger and bigger is not quite the same. Now, part of what happened in the United States is as the this was actually tied to the car. So as the car allowed people to get around, now they didn't have to be in the urban core. They
Hmm.
could go 20 minutes away, and that allowed urban sprawl to happen. The dirt was cheaper, so let's just build a bigger one. And they
Right.
did. They built bigger houses, and they're like, well, we kind of like all this space. You walk in, you got the big high ceilings, and okay, this feels great. And it does. It feels nice, but is it necessary? So I think it's one of those things. The snowball has gotten out of control as urban sprawl has continued. You go to cultures where they don't have urban sprawl. You go to Hong Kong. You go to other
Hmm.
places in China, Japan. They still
Japan.
live in very small form factors, and so the automobile and the sprawl that American space allowed us to do, that's really kind of the underlying reason that you see a lot of this happen. And then whatever the psychological things are where we just like it so much we don't want to pull back. You do see people starting to realize, you know what? That European lifestyle, being able to live, work, play in a neighborhood, like that's pretty cool. I don't necessarily
Mhm.
want to commute an hour or two every day. That does kind of suck. And so people are starting to realize in Gen X, Gen Z, they're like, maybe we just want to have a smaller place that's in a neighborhood that we can walk and get to all of our stuff, and that's a pretty good lifestyle, and it is. So we're starting to see that shift. I just think it's going to be a challenge to get that to happen on a grand scale.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I was checking out, especially the ebook you have around that, on your site, where you're talking about it's not just, hey, the asset class shift, but it's really the behavior shift and the social shift which drives the way we live, work, play, and commute or not commute, etc.
Right.
So putting a bow on this, when you're talking about the housing crisis, what are some things? You quoted you talked about that data, the 675 home shortage, and that was just in Texas. But
Texas, right.
right, but putting a bow on like a problem statement around the housing crisis. It's that we simply don't have enough affordable housing. Is that what it would be?
It is, yeah. It has to do with the portions of the population that are too far outside of that range that is reasonable. Like, if you make $20 million a year and you live in $1 million house, $1 million house is not a problem.
Hmm.
If you make $100,000 a year and you live in $1 million house, you're probably getting stretched. Okay, so that you start to, as the incomes come down, that's where you're starting to see this issue. The upper echelons, the 1%, the 2% of the top incomes, they can do whatever they want, doesn't
Right.
matter. But it's when you start to get down into the all of us who make things happen, all of the people who are actually out there building and creating and doing a
Producing.
lot of the work, those are the people who need to focus more intently on what are they spending. And the spending gets out of control with housing if you're not careful, and that form factor, that size, is a big driver for that. So we believe that there is a problem. It is solvable, but it takes a lot of work, and we're willing to do the work. We're willing to do our part. And so putting affordable units in place in the areas where they're needed, that's what we're doing. That's what we're committed to.
Perfect. So in other words, it's getting the right amount of house for the income levels that we can look at that match the data.
Correct.
Cool. Outstanding. Appreciate that. So big on build to rent. This is exactly what we're talking about, right? So we're
Hmm.
defining the problem, basically the opportunity, basically the level of service and type of service that we're looking to provide. You're looking to provide. So talk to me, about build to rent. Sounds pretty straightforward, build to rent, but just make it as simple as lowest level factor of what it is. Just define it. Talk about briefly what the model is.
Hmm.
Everyone that's listening can go and learn a whole bunch more about this, looking at the resources you have on site, the different videos you've done before, etc.
Hmm.
But just in a nutshell, give us an idea of what the build to rent model looks like and
Sure.
is.
So the asset class on a commercial scale is pretty new, but the concept is not new at all. We all know somebody, an older guy in our hometown. He owned 5 or 6 or 10 rent houses, and he would go take care of them, and that was his little income as a retiree. He had his rent houses. So that's kind of the predecessor of build to rent. These were homes that were single family rentals, and he had them in a little bit of a portfolio, and he had to drive around and take care of them. And the as the problem gets worse, bigger pockets realize, these bigger pots of money are like, hey, how do we do this at scale? So we don't really want to own random homes all over the city, but we
Hmm.
definitely want to own homes that people are paying us to live in. That's a good business model.
Yep.
So wait a minute, what if we just do homes in a subdivision with nice amenities and all the things that people would want, and then we could just manage that whole community like a little horizontal apartment complex. We just have a person on site and they just manage this little ecosystem, and all the homes are right there. We don't have to drive all over town to get to them. Well, wow, this makes a lot of sense. And so the concept is not entirely new. People have kind of done it over time, but it didn't come to the forefront as, oh, hey, this is a new asset class in and of itself. This is an actual thing, until the last 3 or 4 years. And now we're starting to see these pop up all over the place. There's enormous amounts of institutional money, billions of dollars, tens of billions, maybe even hundreds of billions of dollars that are driving to this particular asset class, because build to rent is becoming a solution for a lot of the problems we just talked about. Another element is that we have as Americans is that we like our independence. And
Hmm.
when you go into an apartment complex and you got to go into the parking garage, and then you got to walk 600 yards down corridors to get to your unit, and then when you want to go outside to walk your dog, you got to go walk the 600 yards back out to get outside. It just doesn't feel very independent, and to us that just doesn't feel quite so American.
Right.
And so yes, we need a smaller form factor, but we also want our independence because that's just how we are. And you
Yeah.
go to other cultures and it's not so important. But to us as Americans, we just like our own shit. And that's just our own four walls if we can. And that's just a thing that we like. And there's nothing wrong with it. And the build to rent solution to that is really phenomenal. So you can still have smaller form factors, you can still have affordability, but you can walk right outside and your dog can go to the bathroom on grass, and your
Hmm.
kids can go play outside on grass in a yard. And it kind of makes sense. And you can pull into a garage in some cases, and it feels more independent. And Americans like that. And so it's not going to replace apartments. There are still plenty of people that will do that. And it's not going to replace the single family home that you're going to go buy. But there's a bunch of people in between those two. And that section in the middle is growing very rapidly. We have two different groups there. We've got the group that chooses to rent because they just don't want to mess with a house. They don't want to paint it, and they don't want to mow the yard, and they don't do any of that. They don't want to put the down payment. They might only be here a few years and they're going to go somewhere else. They want to rent. So they're renters by choice. Then we also have those that are renters because they don't really have a choice. They're forced to rent because they don't have the down payment, or they don't qualify for a loan, or for whatever reason, it just doesn't work for them to buy a home right now. So both of those groups are growing very rapidly. The numbers are very clear on that. So build to rent, by any metric that you can measure, is going to continue to grow. It just so happens it's also very profitable. And so you combine all these factors, and a lot of money flows to this space.
Yeah, it's like the perfect storm in the timing, right? With
Yeah.
all of these different, market and social and preferences type of combinations to
Yep.
come together to service that need. And so when you're talking about the different types of homes to rent, you're having your own four walls, or you're thinking about, are these the typical, you mentioned workforce housing, you mentioned affordable. This is the 2-1, the 2-2 type of own four walls.
Yeah, we've got the build to rent moniker, so that umbrella has a lot of things in it. And
Hmm.
because it's a new asset class in general, people are still trying to sort out what are the best things. You think about it this way: if I talk about apartments, apartments cover a lot,
Yeah.
right? We got garden style walk up, we got giant high rises that go up 40, 50 stories, and we got everything imaginable in between, and all different levels of amenities. So built to rent is not different. There's plenty of different tiers of what works. The thing that we focus on is the more affordable side. Primarily is going to be things that we're trying to keep that form factor smaller, and maybe we're going to do a duplex or a fourplex instead of a four-walled home by itself, only because that makes more sense. That's from a cost standpoint. But there are groups that will go buy an entire neighborhood of single family homes from a builder, the
Hmm.
same home that was for sale. Now it's going to be a rental. That can work, although in many cases you don't have the same amenities, or you don't have the same density, which that still keeps costs high. So
Hmm.
everyone is trying to figure out what is the exact way that they want to execute BTR for their own fund, or for their own end use case. The way that we focus on it is we've got duplex product, we've got several different ones of those. We've got our townhome product. We're still got to get some kind of density, I think, to really make this make sense. So just trying to do regular homes on regular size lots and rent them. In many cases, the performa is pretty skinny. It doesn't
Hmm.
work as well. So we focus on getting some density, and then also really good amenities that would be similar to an apartment complex, because they still like the things. They still like a pool and a workout room and a dog park and all
Right.
this, and a playground for the kiddos, and all the stuff that apartment complexes offer. People are realizing, you know what, amenities are nice, and if we can have those, we definitely want them. So in BTR, it's definitely become a standard to have that level of amenities, for sure.
Certainly. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. We don't need to delve into the weeds on this one because, like you said, there's just like apartments. There's everything under the sun there, literally, that you could
Mhm.
talk about that on apartments. But for the investors listening, those looking to invest as well, is this do the models that you're also under or building out, are you looking at like for workforce, there's also things like LITAC as well, are those things that
Mhm.
are in your purview that you're looking at, or
We don't do any of the low income tax credits. That's a whole
yep,
separate world, and I think there is value being created there. It's just not an area that we play in particularly. All of our stuff is market rate. There are some
perfect,
USDA programs that we're a part of now that have to do with they're not low income by any means, but they just have to the rents have to be in relation to the median income. So there's a few things you have to
yep,
do there. Some of those programs I think are practical in some areas, although they're with any government program, there's a lot of red tape to go through. So I think in many cases we try to avoid that and just go the traditional route when possible, traditional market rate. So as an investor, my advice would be to really understand a little bit about the submarket that the project is in, and what
hmm,
does the submarket need? Does it need the thing that they're building? And if it needs the thing that they're building, and you can look at the rents and say that, okay, well, these rents are comparable to what's in the area, or the rents are comparable to what's maybe even outside the area but similar. You've got to look at rents. I think getting comparable rents, when someone is just guessing at a rent, or they're putting a rent on a performa that is way too high, that can get a project in a lot of trouble. So we only put rents in our underwriting that are based on comps. And in fact, we're
awesome,
usually going to be below comps on purpose. So we like to build in a lot of conservative underwriting,
conservative,
yeah, with what we do. So I would just say, as an investor, just be very cautious. It's very submarket specific. If you're trying to do Class A, super nice, really fancy BTR out in the middle of nowhere, you're not going to get the rents. You're just not. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's no way you can build super affordable, very low income rentals in downtown Dallas because your dirt cost is too high. There's just no way you'd ever be able to make money on that. So it just depends a lot on the submarket and what that particular area needs.
Yeah, sage advice for sure. The whole idea of real estate being local has context, certainly.
For sure.
Um, so, you know, again, just pivoting just a degree there, continuing down and pulling this thread, since we're talking more to the investor and you're, giving education around this. One of the things that, the different asset classes offer too will be, as you know, things like the multifamily value add or self storage or whatever, any of those, buy the business, acquire the business based on cash flow, really is
Mm-hmm.
what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of, well, hopefully cash flow day one, except for, if there is no cash flow and they have to implement the business plan to get the big sale later on.
Right.
Talk to us about what that looks like for this model. It's still a development project, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you guys are putting together your deals, is it, no cash flow or from the start, or is this in a fund where there's still some cash flow in the start? And then once you start to do the lease ups, it continues to, accelerate, or how does that deal look
Yeah,
on
yeah,
investor
great. So
returns?
we got a couple of different answers we'll layer in here.
Sure.
So we're talking about asset classes and how they relate to cash flow, which is absolutely true.
Correct.
Anything that is a development project, as you know, you've got a time to do the development portion. Now,
Mhm.
as an investor, you want that to be as compressed as possible. So the questions to ask, are you buying, are is the dollars you're investing, are they going to buy the raw land, sit on it while the entitlement is done, then do the construction? Because that can be done. That's a normal process, but you got a lot of time in there,
Mhm.
potentially years that could get extended to many years. Or are you investing into dirt that is already entitled, whether they bought it and did it themselves as the developer or buying entitled dirt and then now they're just going to go vertical with the construction? That's going to abbreviate and maybe control the risks a little bit on the time side. So time risk with real estate is a really significant element. There's
Yep.
some money risk, you can get overruns if somebody doesn't plan right, but time risk is really the big one that affects IRRs. So you want to know, like, where is your money hitting in the development cycle, and you want it to hit as late as possible so that you don't have some of this front end risk. And a big part of what we do is try to bring investor dollars in as late as possible in the process, where we've acquired dirt earlier, done the entitlements before closing, perhaps done anything we can to abbreviate some of those entitlement risks in that time frame. Okay, so going back to your question, there was something. Oh yeah, you mentioned a fund, and I think this is a really really important thing. In fact, I just did a video this weekend that'll go out next week on funds. This is an important one. If you go with a project by project investment, just a syndication, this is an apartment building or this is one BTR project. Nothing wrong with that at all. It's still a great way to invest. We still like to recommend going into a fund though, because it allows you to diversify where your dollars are spread. And so then if you do have some of that time risk or monetary risk that happens to come into play in the project, if there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 projects in a portfolio, one of them can take a little bit of a hit and it doesn't affect the overall returns for your dollars. And it's real estate. There is risk. If there's a
Mhm.
developer or a fund that's telling you that there's no risk, they are lying to you, and you should take your money and run, because
Yeah.
there's absolutely risk. That's why we make these returns. If you don't want risk, you go put your money in the bond market and you get 5 or 6%. If you want to make 20 or 25% on your money, you have to look at some risk. Now, you want to mitigate that and you want to go with teams that are doing a good job to mitigate that, but there's still risk, and you want to continue to risk mitigate as much as possible. And a fund is a good way to do that. So you can't always do a fund, but when you've got a good fund option, I really like those.
Outstanding. I That's perfect. So there is a follow-on question there, but for the listener, I just want to make sure that they really understand what you're talking about. Is that investing in a fund, just like you were talking about, and that nuance means that there's multiple projects, so that your dollars can be, I don't want to say dollar cost average, but put over time, right? So that uh, you do get the benefits all those different projects and cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to that original question I had, which is for what you guys are offering, or if I put, you know, my dollar in, it will be hitting as latest in the project as possible. But
Mm-hmm.
how, early in theory could I be expecting to look for returns? I
Sure.
know there's lots of
Right.
projects. I totally understand that
Yeah.
there's
Yeah. Yeah.
range, etc.
Yeah.
But
Exactly. Yeah. So great question. So I'm glad you got me back on track there. So with our stuff, it's usually a year plus before you start to see rent dollars coming back. right? So let's
Mhm.
just say, I'll think there's one project in particular in Anna, Texas, a large project with a lot of townhomes on it. That particular project, the entitlements are done. And so as investor dollars come in, they're coming in to do just the construction portion. We've already owned that property for years and done all the entitlements. And so your dollars are coming in, and you're not going to get dollars back until year two as rents start to come in, dollars flow back. With most development projects, the big return is when the project is sold. And
Mhm.
there's a couple reasons why. So you've got a pretty significant debt load on the project. You're having to service the debt, especially now with the interest rates. You're having to service the debt with a lot of that cash flow that's coming back from the rents. So a lot of that cash flow is going out the door. You're not really getting a ton of money back during the process with those rents. But hopefully, if your developer or your fund manager did their work correctly, they've built a lot of equity in the process because they bought the dirt, they did the entitlements, they've built a lot of equity into the deal. And once you exit, that's when the big payday is. And so with a development deal, the reason there is some risk, that's why the returns are higher. And then you get the big payday at the end. So, you're going to see other options that you should also consider. You should never have all of your real estate dollars into development. You never should have all of your real estate dollars into self storage or all of your real estate dollars into value add multifamily. You should mix it up because they're all a little bit different in how they return dollars. So if you're looking at cash on cash, where you're really depending on those dollars. Like I'm going to put 200 grand in, and I'm depending on the dollars coming back every month to pay my bills.
Yep.
Then development projects are not for you, and you
Mhm.
should be very cautious about doing that. If you really want the big returns and it's about a longer term play, hey, I really want to 2x or 2.5x my money over a period of 4 or 5 years, then development projects are going to have better returns almost in every case. When you go with a project that has the better cash flow, monthly cash flow coming back, the overall return over time is going to be lower because it's low risk and you get more money back sooner. So just think about that as you're investing and as you're looking at how you layer things into your portfolio. I would never suggest doing all of one. I would try to do a little bit of each of those.
Perfect. Awesome. I think there's a couple tidbits I really want to add context here before we move on to the next point. It's that even within real estate, based on your goals in the real estate quote unquote asset class at the highest level, you can still diversify your portfolio based on what you're looking for. Are you
Mhm.
looking for that quote unquote, bond style reliable cash that might be lower cash coming in?
Mhm.
Or are you looking for those, chunks of cash in development? What are you looking for? And I think, again, just additional context is with tech professionals and others that, executive level, what have you, it's you're going to be getting these chunks of stocks that vest, right?
Right. Yep.
Chunks of stocks that vest. And so even if you have this cash that you're sitting on, you could go get some reliable cash from a value add multifamily and get that reliable dollar, but also go into places like Charles is talking about, these development that sure you don't see this for a year, but you got this money that vested, and so you should do something with it. How many
Yeah.
dollars can I get for these dollars? And do you risk it as much as possible? So
Hmm. Hmm.
um, thanks you for covering that. And so for the remaining time here, I really want to pivot a little bit more. We talked about the problem opportunity. We talked about the asset class. You covered that as well, and gave some comparison. It's really important for a lot of you know tech companies, or companies in general, whatever it is, but especially again talking to this audience, is that operational excellence is so key. Having good run books, this is the differentiator and the culture. We hear things like systematized processes, we hear about things like making sure the culture is there, etc. And one of the things I picked up about what you were talking about that really stood out for me too is, three big things that are important to you. Actually, before I get there, is that um, you're talking about making high quality decisions, outside the box, thinking, problem solving, and
Hmm.
exceptional collaboration. Now, the thing I was going to mention is that you talk about making sure that you have de-risked investments for the investor and for the market, right? But that you're also someone who has a high tolerance for risk. I'm
Hmm.
curious, since we're talking about you as the owner, previous operator, and in some cases I'm sure too as an advisory perspective, how do you reconcile these two things from having a high tolerance for risk but also wanting to de-risk opportunities you present?
Right. So this is great. I think about it this way. When my dad's a firefighter, He just retired after 35 years as a firefighter in Plano, Texas. So very cool career. Very cool to see that, that commitment to the public good. It's not the highest paying job, but he's done it for a long time, done it at a very high level. And
Yeah.
a lesson from that is like I think about when a house catches fire, those guys are running toward it. Everybody else is running the opposite way.
Hmm.
That's just a very interesting way to think about things. You're running toward it, everybody else is running away. I think about that with some risk. So I'm seeking out what are these risk areas? What are the areas that have some risk associated with them? Because and anybody that's ever made significant wealth will tell you they had to take risks. You
Yeah,
literally cannot
absolutely.
get extreme wealth starting off at a. If you start with low dollars, let's say less than 100 million, you can't go to a billion without taking very significant risk. Now, let's talk about that. So I'm seeing risk, and risk is opportunity. So I'm sprinting toward it. Now, I have a high IQ. I like data. I want to de-risk this as much as possible. Just because risk exists doesn't mean you can't mitigate it. And so I think what happens a lot of times, and this is not just my words, this is a lot of guys that have made tons of money taking risk. It's always about, people shy away from it because it's risky, and so they don't take the time to find out, to understand it, to learn about it. Let's, this little ticking time bomb in my hand. What can I play with it and look at it and look at all the different possibilities here and find out how can I make this the safest option possible? So I want to get all that upside. I don't want the downside. I want zero downside.
That's
So
right.
how do I create that floor for myself by using lots of good data? We live in a time, 2024, the amount of data that we have at our fingertips, at our phones, or at our computer, it's
Outstanding.
freaking mind-boggling. Now, to do what I do 30 or 40 years ago, I don't know that I would be interested in doing it because I wouldn't have had the ways to mitigate my risk. Information is such a massive element here. And
Mhm.
so by using information and by using all the tools, every tool that we can possibly have at our fingertips, we're able to mitigate an enormous percentage of this risk. And so now I can take investor dollars, go after a thing that was perceived as risky. So that means a lot of people ran the other way, which is good. There's fewer
Mhm.
people playing there. I like that. Less competition. Now we're going to do a better job than the next guy at using all the technology. Now, this is especially true in real estate because there's still a lot of cowboys. And I say that the gunslinging guys of the old west. There's a lot of old guys that they just had big balls and they like to take risk. And
That's
sometimes they
right.
got knocked on their ass and they lost everything and then they would just go do it again.
Right.
It doesn't have to be that way. Those guys, in many cases, still today in real estate, are taking these big risks without mitigating with data. I don't know why they're doing it, but you have all the ability to use the data. So we're kind of the young guard, I guess. I don't think I'm young necessarily, but I'm younger than a lot of people in real estate. And we're taking data and taking a new approach to de-risk and to risk mitigate as much as possible. There's AI, there's all these other things that allow us to really be very sharp, and we feel like mitigate a huge amount of the risk and still be able to chase after those big returns.
Certainly. So if I'm sort of reading between the lines, I mean, there's a lot of absolutely valid things, broad strokes. But if I can try and make that, any level of being succinct along there too, it's that traditional, older ways. I don't want to say traditional, older ways of doing it is that they didn't have the we'll say the information resources technology, right? I mean, technology comes in many different forms, not only maybe things that you'll have on ground or the aerial opportunities to survey land now as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about AI to forecast potential solutions, which
Mm-hmm.
everything is AI based now,
Mm-hmm.
or at least that's the marketing for it. But you're talking about diving deep, and so or you're talking about learning about things, getting into the data, which makes it de-risked because you not only can take the education that you have from the quote unquote yesteryears, the ways that was done, but dive deep into how do these things really operate. And when you're talking about de-risking, you have a much more predictable model. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that's a good way to put it. You know, it comes down to a lot of things that are inherently simple, but technology allows us to just do them better and more efficiently. And there's a lot of things that other people could be doing, but it takes too much time or it takes too much effort. And now we use technology to do it faster. Like
Hmm.
simple things like compiling data from rents and being able to update those automatically, or using the right technology to calculate how operational costs are going to run in a subdivision. We use this a lot in design. There's a lot of technology we can use in the design process, so that we have a very efficient, very affordable, very easy to construct building, and that starts from the very first day of the design process. So it's really, technology is coming into play in every facet of the development process.
Awesome. I'd love to dig into, what kind of technology. I know we don't have time for that. That's a little bit in the weeds as well. But you know, feel free to end on this. I'm just going to go off the top of my head. Like you're talking about looking at the data from all the different sources. I mean, there's so many different companies out there that are harvesting private data as well. So getting, not only using your economics brain, but other people's brains to get insights off of those. We're just having a closer look in all the different external signals about the market, right? We talk about why BTR, what else is going on with things like financing? What else is things like going on with incomes, et cetera, adjacent markets, like you talked about cars, like you talked about like goods, et cetera, how that might affect, the quote unquote consumer roughly said, the tenant, right, as an example,
Right.
their lifestyle habits. And then things on ground, maybe different forms of surveying, different forms of doing things cheaper and faster on ground, right? Are there any other types of technology, just like off the top of your head, you can bullet point that you're thinking that's
Well, I'll,
is
I'll think of, I'll give you one. And we created $8 million of value with one technology, so it's just pretty cool. So it's
nice?
a piece of property that we acquired, and we before we acquired it, or shortly after, we knew that there was the possibility, distinct possibility, that the floodplain that was marked, the FEMA floodplain that was marked on the maps, we thought it was wrong.
Mm,
If it was wrong, it could go either way. It could
yeah,
go to our disadvantage, or it could go big time to our advantage. And we were pretty sure that this was big time to our advantage. So if the FEMA floodplain was marked, that baseline flood, they call it the base flood elevation.
yeah,
If that base flood elevation is wrong, let's say the land slopes pretty
hmm,
gradually, and it's only that base flood elevation is only off by 2 feet. Well, 2 feet moves that base flood elevation way over here,
yeah,
and now we got a bunch of floodplain back as buildable area. And that's what happened on this project. We got a lot of floodplain back as buildable area because we were able to fly it with LiDAR. It was very heavily treed, it's very challenging. Fly with LiDAR, use computer modeling, and through the computer modeling, we were able to build out a model. We had to model the whole floodplain to find out, oh, you know what? FEMA is wrong. Those
nice,
maps are those maps are not supposed to be precise anyway. They're just a kind of a
yeah,
guesstimation,
yeah,
which is fine. And so now, and that's FEMA relies on the private sector to give them good feedback to make these correct. And so it's part of the LOMR process, LOMR, which is where you a letter of map revision. So you put all this data together, but LiDAR was very critical in this process, and a lot of computer modeling stuff you could not have done
hmm,
probably even 10 years ago would have been
yeah,
very challenging. And now it just happens. And so that created $8 million worth of value, just like this, because now that's no longer floodplain. Now that's buildable area. And that was a massive win on that particular project, all driven by technology.
outstanding. Yeah, perfect example. The satellite tech, et cetera, huge for changing the industry for oil and gas and others as well. Um, uh, okay, cool. So moving on to this again, I love these values and these sort of approaches. Um, the other thing is that around making high quality decisions.
Mm.
Something that you talked about is that you don't actually read a lot of books, but you like to study periodicals, check on things in LinkedIn. There's so much data at your fingertips right now, like we had sort of just talked about, and oftentimes spending hours to research. And when I heard you give this answer previously, what came to my mind was, okay, well, these are places to certainly get information, right? But you talked about, if you make a few high quality decisions every day, then that's your job as the owner, right? That's your job as, setting direction and vision. It sounded very much like, a Jeff Bezos quote, and of course others who are successful as well. It's like it's
Mhm.
the job of the owner. So my two questions are, we can tackle this one first, and I'll reiterate them. But the first one is, in addition to these different places where you get your own learnings from, right? Who do you model? Who do you model after? Who are the people that you would, come to mind who have influenced you and follow, if not these, books and packages of information that way?
Mhm.
And then along the lines of that, and feel free to thread it in, is what does a high quality decision look like to you?
Yep. Good. Okay. So the first one is, what people do I look up to? What mentors, what people do I kind of place as an example that I'm trying to be like? For some reason, I've never had an interest in looking after a certain person or a particular person. Like I want to be like that. It just never
Same.
was a thing. I always respected my dad's work ethic, and I modeled a lot of my in my younger years. I was like, definitely wanting to be that. I knew that if I worked hard, I could achieve a lot. So that I got that from him. But as I got older, after my teenage years, there never was a person that I thought I need to be like them. But there were people that had individual qualities that I thought were really special. And so for me, it was more about the person that I look up to is the person that I know I can be. And I've always had a very high view of my capability. And even as a young child, like I knew as a 4 year old, I could be something great. There's a story. So I think I was 4, and I just decided one day I'm playing outside, and I decided, you know what? I think I'm going to go on an adventure. I just took off walking down the road.
Nice.
I'm 4,
Yep.
and I'm walking down the road. Thank God, I get like a mile from the house. My dad happens to drive by,
What the
and this
heck?
is we lived out in the country, so this is a county road. So there's nobody to steal children, fortunately. Otherwise, they would have just scooped me up.
Right.
So my dad drives by. He stops. He sticks his head out the window. He's like, "Where are you going?"
Where are you
I was
going,
like,
little buddy?
"I'm just going on an adventure, Dad." He's like, "No, you're not. Get your ass in
Right.
the truck." And I just had this great. I just thought that I was capable of going on an adventure at 4, which is
Mhm.
insane. But I've just always had this thought: I'm going to do great things, and I didn't feel like I ever had any limitations. And my family encouraged that, and they never made me feel like I was limited in any way. So I'm always understanding I can be great, and knowing that I'm just not quite there yet because I'm always wanting to improve. This is the same way that I always wanted to take a step up in my career. Personally, I always want to improve and take a step up. So when I would see a quality in somebody that, you know what, that person that I'm trying to be out there, that's a quality that he needs. And so I would pull that from somebody. I try to model that, like things that are really important to me, like, sleep quality is so big. I really focus a lot on sleep quality, and that affects my mental state and the way I'm able to make these high quality decisions. Like you said, nutrition is big, and my fitness and the way that I'm treating people, the way I'm acting around other people, and those connections with other humans, those are really important too. And the way that I'm conducting myself, I really want to conduct myself with excellence and do things well. And these are all qualities that I've pulled from people that I've come in contact with. And so I'm really an amalgamation of a lot of great individuals that I was able to see and pull, one or two things from. And so that's always how I'm building. And I'm not there yet. I still have lots of things to learn and lots of things to improve. But I'm just looking out there at the person that I know I'm capable of being and bolting on new qualities
Mhm.
constantly. When it comes to high quality decisions, for me, it's a percentage thing. So I want to have, if I'm moving quickly, I want to have an 80% likelihood of being right, and I'm able to move pretty quickly with those decisions. So I want to get to 80%. If it's a decision that I don't have a high risk tolerance in, I want to get to that 90, 95%. If you try to get to 100, that's a thing that perfectionists get kind of tied up in, and then they'll never make a decision.
Yep.
And that will absolutely crush you because you won't get things done. So 100 is unrealistic. You can't do it, but you've got to dial that back to what is reasonable. What is a percentage of correctness that allows you to still move forward with some pace? It's actually okay to be wrong. Perfectly okay to be wrong. People are wrong all the time. If you think that you can only be right or you have failed, that is
Mhm.
absolutely not the case. The journey is the fun part, and you're going to be wrong sometimes. I prefer to be wrong 20% of the time or less, but I'm comfortable. If I'm wrong 20% of the time, no problem. I'm making high quality decisions at scale. And so 80% right decisions, that's a really good batting average. If you put that in baseball, I would be the
Mhm.
best hitter of all time. If you put that
Absolutely.
in any sport, I would be the best there ever was at 80/20. And that's just, we're humans. We're not perfect. We're going to mess up a little bit. So I try to make 80% right decisions. And there's going to be a few that I might have missed, but I'm really focusing on getting very, very close to that 80/20 rule. And that works great for me.
Awesome. Outstanding. So, uh, obviously changes like you were talking about on the places where you might not have as much risk, and or it might be more impactful where you want to get to that 90 or greater type of area, especially when
Mhm.
de-risking investments. You want to get as much data so you can make that decision that is a much higher probability and predictability around it, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it ends up being a probability. So I want that 80% probability of success in normal everyday tasks and normal things. And when it comes to those really critical big time decisions, I'm going to spend more time. When you're talking about life decisions and big relationships and big business decisions or giant investments, that 90-10. If you get a 90% accuracy, that 90% probability is very comfortable, and you should feel good moving forward when you have that.
Solid. Yeah, this podcast is my own opinions, all that good stuff. Even though my W-2 is with Amazon right now, one of the things we reference a lot is one-way and two-way doors. Two-way doors, you can go through and you can come back with little impact versus a one-way door. You can go through that door, but it's going to take significant,
Right.
impact to go out there and come back.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
anyway, love it. So, couple not quite rapid fire things, but just shorter things. Again, respectful of time here. Is a fun tidbit. You mentioned you were on a hog farm in Iowa, but
Hmm.
I don't know what the story was behind that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
talk
That's a
to
good
us.
one.
What is that all about?
If you want, I've got some time. We'll be fine on time. If you're
Cool.
good,
I am. Yep.
you good? Okay. So I had some really cool experiences in at the end of high school, early college, where I was able to go do some internships and kind of move to different places around the country, and it was amazing. And I could to kind of share those with you. So the hog farm in Iowa was really fascinating. I was involved in livestock, and we had a farm when I grew up, and so was in 4-H, and I had pigs, and
Nice.
I was just really fascinated by it. So I worked in an internship for a farm in Iowa. It was family owned farm, but they were shipping seed stock, like the breeding stock, all over the planet. So I think we shipped to maybe 20 countries that summer. And
Cool.
so, it was really fascinating, very, very high quality family run operation, wonderful people in northeastern Iowa. So absolutely amazing. Now it was a lot of work, and
Hmm.
pigs don't smell great every day. So there was that, but I absolutely loved it. Pigs are fascinating, and I learned a lot from them. They have such amazing personalities, like dogs. They're actually pigs are smarter than dogs, in fact,
Hmm.
and they have such personality, and they're so fun to work with, and they just have their little
Works, huh?
eccentricities and
Yeah.
quirks, just like people, just like dogs and other animals. So that was a great experience. I worked in Washington D.C. for a congressman for a while, which was really fascinating. I learned all about the inner workings of the political process. I was a fishing guide in Alaska, so that was super cool. We'd see bears and we'd see all the bald eagles and catch big fish all the time. That was great. So I'm
Awesome.
really
These are
really
all,
fortunate to be able to go around and do lots of cool things when I was younger.
yeah, broadening the horizon in different areas that are contrast really show different perspectives. And from Alaska to Washington, certainly it's two different two different parts of life, no doubt.
Very big
um,
difference.
what is something that you would say you learned from being out there on the hog farm? Something that's you what's something that's impacted you, a lesson that you took from there?
Yeah, that was really relationships on that one. So the family that I worked for, you know, a big part of their brand, they didn't really do a lot of advertising. They didn't need to. People came to them from all over the globe because they had been doing a really, really good job at what they were doing for many decades. And so it was a second generation or third generation farm, and for them relationships were everything, and
Hmm.
that was it. That's if you were going to trash a relationship, you might as well, like, you were dead to them. Like, that was just
Got it.
not, like, why would you do such a thing? And it was not about the money. They
Yeah.
lived very simply. They had tons of money, they were making great money, but they were just simple people. And it was just really a great contrast. You come from a big city like Dallas or somewhere like that, and or DC. You got everybody flashing money, and it's a maybe even living beyond their means. And you got this
Yeah.
family in Iowa, very successful, living way, 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 way below their means. Driving the truck that's 20 years old, and
Yeah.
not because they have to, but because, I mean, it still works. So
Still
why not,
works.
right? They
Yeah.
didn't care
Yeah.
what anybody thought. It was very their ego was not tied
Down to
to
earth.
what people thought about them, and that's always stuck with me. And I think about that. I'm really grateful for that time there, because they're such wonderful people, and they just were just great people to be around, and they didn't care what other people thought. It was amazing.
Outstanding. Yeah, I know it's kind of a funny follow-up question, especially if you mentioned Alaska. I know DC. Like, you wanna know what lesson I took from the hogs? Yeah, I wanted to know. It's kind of the the one of the three that I was sort of curious about. Um, so sort of closing out and a little bit of the outro in here, I really liked what you mentioned there. You said that I want a life where I can't tell the difference between work and play, and it just kind of comes. And this makes
Mhm.
me think of a quote that I absolutely love. And maybe feel free to elaborate on any parts of this, from the career, your life, etc. But the quote that I really enjoy too here is that the master in the art of living makes little distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his information and his recreation, his love and his religion. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues his vision of excellence at whatever he does, leaving others to decide whether he is working or playing. To him, he's always doing both.
Mm. Who's that quote by? That's fantastic.
James A. Michener.
Okay, because that literally sounds exactly like what I'm trying to do in my life, and I feel very fortunate that I'm pretty much there in most areas, and there's everywhere I'm trying to, you got to tweak here and there to try to make sure that it aligns. But that to me has been the most rewarding part of life, is to dial that in and to realize that people talk about work life balance, and I think it's total crap,
Yep.
because that's saying that they need to be in opposition to each other. You
Right.
have to do one or you have to do the other. And at least for me, especially because I love my work, I don't have to have a there's no difference. So I could be doing work 1 minute or doing something that maybe isn't specifically income driving the next minute. And it's like that throughout the whole day. Like the moment I wake to the moment I go to sleep, I'm doing all manner of different things, some of which drive income and some of which don't. A key element that you mentioned, though, that I think is really important is it talked about excellence there. And to me, that's an overarching principle that I find is absolutely at the core of anybody that's been extremely successful and has established wealth and especially has established happiness. Doing things well because that means something to them, being excellent just for the sake of it, is a really key tenet to anybody that's super happy. And I found that to be the case. So whether it's, the way that the bed gets made, or the way that I cook that healthy lunch that I made, or the way that I'm doing the underwriting for this fund, or the way that the legal documents went together for this particular communication, or the way that I do this podcast, everything is being done with excellence. And to me, there's no choice. I don't even feel like it's a choice of, well, these things I'm going to do kind of shitty, and then these things I'll do those really nice.
Yeah.
I think that that's a problem if you're trying to go between the two. And if you just focus on being just doing everything excellent, that overriding principle, just it makes such a massive difference in your life. I remember my first business was when I was I think it was 6 or 7, so I was mowing yards. I was too I was too small to even push the mower. Fortunately, fortunately, my dad had a really nice self-propelled mower, and I could,
Nice.
it could propel itself, with the gas can on top of it, and all the stuff piled on it. It was the propulsion to get me around the neighborhood. This is before I moved to the farm, and it would get me around the neighborhood to mow these yards. And I remember thinking as a 7-year old, and I'm mowing this yard, and I don't know who's watching. Nobody cares. A seven
Right.
year old mowing,
It's
mowing the yard.
country.
Nobody's watching me, but I wanted to be so good at it. I wanted, just like, every time I turned at the end of the yard, I was like, I could do that a little bit better next time. And I
Mm.
just want to be the best 7-year-old yard mower that anybody had ever seen. And that overriding principle, I don't know if that's from my parents or if that's an innate thing for me, but being excellent at everything I ever tried, is just, that principle brings so much joy, because then it's about the process,
Hmm.
and it's not about the thing at the end. It's about enjoying getting good at all of it, and the success inevitably will come when you do that.
In complete alignment. I don't know if you know the story about the Potters and the two different classes, or the two different groups, where one was about just making.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good
yeah,
story.
yeah. Complete alignment. Anyway, just we have a lot to talk about. Just wrapping up on this. On that same note, um, and pivoting again, just on this last question here is, there's lots of investors, lots of those that are in tech, well, lots that do have this money. They're not really worried about their month to month, so to speak, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
But they're looking to have these things to build more income, so they don't have to stay in tech forever. Although there's certainly facets where it's enjoyable, it takes time. It takes time to keep up. There's new coding languages, there's AI, there's, you
Hmm.
pick it, right? And solving problems takes effort, especially sorting through data. So on the line, or on the topic of just what you were talking about, they want to be likely good investors too. You have to be, be a great steward of your resources. And
Mhm.
so when we're looking at making, investing decisions and maybe even the first investment decision, what do you tell new investors on what they should be looking for, right?
Yeah.
How do they go about using frameworks for high quality decision making? How do
Mhm.
they think about de-risking their own first investment as well? And any other words you want to add on what you would tell those first time investors?
Yeah, for sure. I think that you need to look at it from a portfolio perspective. How much money do you want to have working in the various markets? And then what is your risk tolerance? So for somebody that does not have a lot of risk tolerance, they're okay just growing it a little bit. For me, I like to grow it in big chunks.
Hmm.
And so my personal money, I like to have a little more risk. Again, I feel very confident betting on myself to find ways to mitigate that. But if I was low in my risk tolerance, I didn't want to have to worry about anything. Then you want to do things like bonds. Things are going to be CDs. Things are going to be kicking back just a little bit, but you're not going to be losing. The chance of you losing is almost zero. Not quite zero, but very close. So you want to have a larger percentage of your portfolio in those if you're risk averse. Real estate is a great thing to have in the portfolio, but it should never be 100%. So always think about that. What is the balance? There are other things like business acquisitions, private equity. Those are also really good things. Now, for me personally, I have $0 in the stock market. That's just not an area that I prefer to play in. I'm more active in selecting my investments and putting my money with a stockbroker and saying, hey, go play with this and hopefully you do well. That's just never been a thing that I liked. And so I don't have any money in the stock market. I don't advise it, but a lot of people do it, trillions of dollars. I just feel like it's kind of created to make money for the system, not so much for the investor. So
Yep.
I'm not a big fan. Also investing in things like precious metals. Those are also really good things to have in your portfolio. Real estate has made a lot of people very wealthy. So
Hmm.
you'll hear people, oh, real estate, it could go down. Of course. But if you go back in time and you look at the richest people that ever were, many of them got that way and stayed that way through real estate. So for me, a big chunk of my portfolio is going to be real estate. And then it's going to be balanced between different things, right? I'm trying to find ways to diversify my real estate portfolio within my investment portfolio. So that's what we're going to balance between BTR. We're going to have things that are kicking back income. And so then it's about, trying to massage the balance of what you've got your money in. So that for me, it really depends on the risk aversion. I think everybody should have some stuff that is fairly liquid and very low risk, like bonds. So you should have a certain portion of your portfolio in bonds. If you need that money, you can go cash it out. It's kicking you back a little bit too. So I think that's always a safe thing. I'm going to have a lower percentage in that, 10 or 15%. Some people might want to have 20 or 30% in bonds that's just kicking back a little bit of money, but it's relatively liquid, semi liquid.
Hmm.
You can go cash it out in a day or two. So that's a good thing to have as a key component. And then real estate, a big chunk for me. I'm going to have, the majority of my portfolio is real estate. That's my day-to-day business. If I didn't have a lot of money on the line on these projects, I wouldn't want to invest in the projects if I were an investor. Like, does
Yep.
this guy really have money on the line? And I do. I have a lot of money on the line in every project that we do. And I think that's a big show of confidence that I do for our investors. So that's a big thing for me. And then we talk about private equity. We talk about investing in businesses. I think that's a great way to make money. And there's plenty of different opportunities. We have some as well. There's a lot of ways to go make money in the business world passively or semi passively. And so I would always suggest doing that too.
Got it. I'd love to talk to you about that more in the future as well. But yeah, that's a really great picture of things. And then, just to tack on there, fair to say that even in real estate itself, you can, like we had talked about, you can diversify, right?
Mhm.
So that you have more reliable dollars coming, right?
Correct.
And then things like the BTR aspect too. So, awesome. That in mind, again, I just again want to be respectful of your time here. So, just to whatever you want to mention around where can people find you, what kind of conversations do you like to have? Would you be the point of contact? Where's the best place to learn more about you and continue the conversation with you?
Sure. Yeah, we'd love to interface with you. So you can find me on social media, Charles Covey on Instagram. Yeah, you can also catch us at landvest-capital.com and catch up with either me or one of my staff. If you have a conversation about investing, you have questions about real estate, you have questions about our specific projects, we'd love to talk with you. We really enjoy what we do and really like talking to people. A lot of people contact us just wanting to learn about real estate. And maybe they're new and they want to kind of look at the different options. We're happy to refer you out. If we don't have what you need, we have a really big network of people across the country, and we're happy to refer you out to somebody that might have a thing that might fit you better. So would love to have those conversations. Please reach out. Really enjoy the conversation with you, Stephen. This has been great. Let's do it again. And hopefully we can interface with some of your listeners. I hope they reach out to us.
Yeah, certainly. It's been great to get to know you better too, Charles.
Cheers. Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Path to Passive. We love connecting with our listeners and those on the path to architecting their wealth and improving their lives. Feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to see in future episodes. Get in touch with us through email or Instagram. See you next week for a new episode.